summation of mass into displacement divided by the total mass, or summation m. And accordingly, by applying rate of change concept to this, we also get velocity of the center of mass, instantaneous velocity, is weighted mean of the velocities of the various particles. So it is summation of mass into velocity divided by the total mass. So these are some of the things that we discussed in the last lecture. Now moving forward from there today, you'll see that from this we also saw that momentum of a system is defined as total mass into velocity of the center of mass, where total mass is, in the case of a discrete particle system, it is summation of mass of all the particles 1 to n. So hence this momentum of the system can also be defined as summation of mass into velocity of the various particles, or this means that the linear momentum of a system is the vector sum of the individual momenta of the various particles. You can see that momentum of each individual particle is mass into velocity of each individual particle. So this is another important concept now. The whole idea of, or the definition of momentum of a system being total mass into velocity of center of mass. Therefore, that momentum of the system can now be defined as the vector sum of the individual momenta of the particles. Okay, now on the basis of this, we had also defined the application of Newton's second law for a system of particles, that is the rate of change of the linear momentum of the system, how we can find that in terms of the net external force. Okay. So let's look at that expression next. Okay. So again, this is just a recap of things that we've already seen in the last lecture, just quickly revising through that. Okay, so from definition of position of center of mass in terms of the formula that it is a weighted mean of the various positions, we get the definition of displacement of center of mass and velocity of the center of mass. Once again, in terms of weighted means of displacement and weighted mean of velocity. Once we find out the formula for velocity of the center of mass, we can also define the linear momentum of the system, that is total mass multiplied by velocity of center of mass. And we see that that is equivalent to the vector sum of the individual momenta of the various particles. So now differentiating this term, differentiating this formula that we have in the end, that momentum of a system is summation pi, we saw that we got the relation that the rate of change of momentum can be equated with the net external force. So the net external force acting on a particle or on a system of particles is equal to the rate of change of its momentum. So this was the final important formula. So in this formula now, F external is nothing but the net external force or the vector sum of all external forces acting on a system. So by net we mean the vector sum of all the forces. But only the external forces. The internal forces don't count because they cancel in action reaction pairs. So we can also define this in terms of total mass into acceleration of center of mass, because momentum of the system is defined as total mass into velocity. All these masses are constant. So rate of change of momentum will become total mass into rate of change of velocity of the center of mass, which will become mass into acceleration of center of mass. Hence, we can also write it in this form. And from this, we can see that therefore, for a system which is mechanically isolated, that means the net external force acting on it is zero. The acceleration of the center of mass is zero. Or in other words, we can say that the linear momentum of such a system is constant or is conserved. So this is the important condition for conservation of linear momentum, which we had again discussed about last time also. So we'll continue with more applications and examples of this today.
Done, sir.
Yeah. So next, let us look at another couple of examples of the application of this concept. Conservation of linear momentum. Yes, that shall get into impulse momentum theorem also. So impulse momentum theorem is basically like, it's a It's an integrated form of Newton's second law. So let's understand impulse and momentum. This should be understood in one or two different contexts. The first thing we should understand for impulse is impulse in context of a single force. So that we can understand as impulse due to a force. Say force F acting for a certain time interval. Let's say t equal to t1 to t equal to t2. So that is defined as the impulse due to the force is defined as integration of force with respect to time from t1 to t2. This is the general formula of impulse. This is the general concept of impulse. Impulse equals to force integrated over time. Okay, but if the force is constant, or a constant force, the impulse just becomes F multiplied by the time interval. So it becomes F delta T. So unless you're talking about a variable force, you can think of a more simple definition of impulse. That impulse is equal to force into time. But as long as the force is uniform. For a constant force, impulse simply equals to force multiplied by the time interval. So delta T is T2 minus T1 like this. So this is in impulse in context of impulse due to a force. Okay. So you can make a quick note of this if you like. Next, we will see the relation between net impulse, okay, and linear momentum, how they are related. And that is called the impulse momentum theorem. Now, this too we will first understand in terms of a single particle. Okay. And then we will expand it to the idea of a system of particles. Okay, so I hope that it is clear up to this point what we mean by impulse due to a single force. In
Yes, sir.
general, it is force integrated over time, right?
Yes, sir.
Whereas if it is a uniform force or constant force, we can just say it is force multiplied by time. Now we'll see that if we interpret impulse due to net force, okay, and we apply Newton's second law, then we can understand the relation between impulse and momentum. So coming to that next. Yes, exactly. But Akshat, that is provided that constant force that you're talking about, that is the net force acting. If it is one of many forces acting on a body, then it will not be impulse due to that single force, will not be able to change in momentum. Okay. It is the net force which causes the change in momentum, not any particular force alone. For example, a block moving on a horizontal surface due to some external force acting horizontally. Now gravity is continuously acting on it, but gravity will not apply any impulse. The net impulse due to gravity will get cancelled by the impulse because of some other force like normal reaction. So it will not be equal to change in momentum. Okay. So now let us understand. So now this thing, if we apply to it for a body or particle of mass m, let's say, Newton's second law tells us that the net force acting on it is equal to rate of change of momentum, where p is equal to mass into velocity, and F net is the net force. That is the sum, the vector sum of all forces acting on the body. So F net is like if there are n number of forces acting, it is a vector sum of F1 plus F2 plus till whatever the last force is, like that. So from this statement now, if we cross multiply, we can see that net force into dt is equal to dp, where dp is the change in momentum for a small time dt. So if I now integrate this from time t1 to time t2, I will get the net impulse for that particular time interval. And this I will integrate. And this would have had some initial value p1, let's say. And at the end of the time interval t2, it has some final momentum p2, let's say. Okay. So what we get from this is that net impulse is equal to change in momentum for a system of so for a single particle. Okay. For particle or body. Okay. So that J net is the net impulse acting from time t1 to t2. That is the net impulse for this time interval. If the net force is constant, here also we can write it as net force into time. Okay. And delta P, on the other hand, is P2 minus P1, or it is the change in momentum of that body, change in linear momentum. So the impulse momentum theorem for a single particular body tells us that the net impulse equals to the change in momentum in a certain time interval. And again, if the net force is constant, then we need not write the impulse as integration. We can just write it net force multiplied by time delta t. So that is where you get that kind of relation, that F delta t is P delta P or M into delta V. But then we have to understand that first of all, F we are talking about is the net force. And secondly, that net force should be constant. Otherwise, we can't write the impulse as simply force into time. We have to write it as force integrated over time. So anyhow, what happens is that this particular form of impulse momentum theorem, that is impulse momentum theorem applied to a single particle, is not very important or very useful, because we use, much rather than this impulse momentum theorem, we use the differentiated form of it, that is Newton's second law, which is that net force is equal to rate of change of momentum. So instead of saying that net impulse is change in momentum, we use the principle that net force is equal to rate of change of momentum. But we'll see that for a system of particles, when we convert this idea into the relationship between net external impulse and linear momentum of the system instead of linear momentum of a single body, we will see that it gives us quite a useful concept, okay, which is called then the impulse momentum theorem for the system. Yes, Parv, I'll explain in a bit of time what is the difference between center of mass and center of gravity. Center of mass is the symmetry point, the weighted mean of the position of the various particles. So that definition we've understood. Center of gravity is defined as the point within a body or a system through which the net gravitational force, or in other words, the weight of the object is acting. So they are defined in a different way. Center of gravity is to do with, a center of force, and that force being weight or gravitational force. So it's a dynamical quantity, whereas center of mass is to do with symmetry point of mass distribution. So it's an internal physical property of the system. Okay. Now we'll also see that in most cases, like if you're talking about any body near the surface of the earth and the body's size is not huge, like it is not comparable to the size of the earth, it is very small compared to the earth itself, then center of gravity actually lies at the center of mass. But in some exceptional cases, like if you consider a very tall structure which whose height might be up to 1,000 kilometers or something, then for such a structure the center of gravity will not be at the same position as center of mass, because gravitational field is changing with height. So technically, there is a difference between the definition of center of mass and center of gravity. And practically, what happens is that as long as our system is experiencing a uniform gravitational field, we can say that center of gravity coincides with the center of mass. But the moment we are in a variable gravitational field, that is, we cannot say gravitational field is uniform at all points within the system, then what happens is center of gravity and center of mass are two separate points, and they are calculated by two separate definitions. So hope
Okay,
this is
sir.
clear for the moment. Right?
Yes, sir.
Center of gravity कैसे निकालेंगे and how we define it, we will come to that in a chapter of gravitation. Okay? But by the end of this chapter also I'll explain to you what is essentially the difference between calculation of position of center of mass versus center of gravity. Okay. So now next let us look at impulse momentum theorem applied to a system of particles instead of a single particle. Let's see what happens if we apply it to a system. Okay, so we've seen that net external force acting on a system equals to the rate of change of its momentum, which in other words is mass into acceleration of center of mass, total mass. So we integrate this now. So F external into dt integrated over some time interval is equal to the change in momentum of the system integrated for that same time interval. So we'll see the left hand side will give us the net impulse because of external force, and that will be equal to the change in momentum of the system. So internal forces impulse does not contribute to the system's momentum change. It is only the impulse due to external forces. So J external here is the impulse due to net external force. Acting from a certain time t1 to a certain time t2. So once again, from this you can also infer one thing, that if the system is mechanically isolated, then there will be zero external force. The net external force being zero, there will also be zero impulse acting because of external forces. So the impulse due to external force being zero, that means the momentum of the system will be conserved. So this theorem also in that sense justifies the principle of conservation of linear momentum, which occurs when the external force is zero, because of which the net impulse is zero because of external forces. If this quantity is zero, which basically means that F external is zero. So therefore, integration of F external will also be 0. So impulse is equal to 0. So it means that momentum of the system is conserved. Yes.
In the second point, in the second line, you have written integration of dp system momentum from time t1 to t2.
Come again, I didn't understand. Momentum of the
In the
system is
second,
conserved. Yeah.
yes, in the second line, sir, you have written change in momentum of system from t1 to t2, integration of change of momentum.
That is C. We have cross multiplied the dt in the first line, right? So F external into
Yes,
dt is dp. Now you integrate that from some initial time t1 to some final time t2. Okay. So when you integrate dp, what you will get? You will get delta p, the change in momentum, which will be the final momentum at time t2 minus the initial momentum at time t1, because the limits are from t1 to t2.
why are we using time here? Like we should use t, right?
Yeah, but I mean, what I mean by T1 to T2 is the lower limit is when the time is T1. So the momentum is some value T1 at that time.
Okay, got it.
Like that. So the limit basically tells us that from what time to what time we are integrating. So that will tell us from what momentum to what momentum. What is the initial momentum and what is the final momentum, right?
Yes, sir, got it.
Okay, so once again, if the system is mechanically isolated, so the net external force is 0, which means that the net external impulse is 0. So this implies that the momentum of the system is conserved. Or in other words, the momentum of the system is a constant. It's not changing with time. Or rate of change of momentum is therefore 0. And we can express this in so many other ways. If we say momentum of a system is conserved and it's a system with constant mass, it also means that velocity of the center of mass is constant. Acceleration of the center of mass is 0. So all these things can further be said because we're dealing with a system where total mass is constant. Okay, so last time we had seen a simple example problem of two charged particles, just as a demonstration that in what kind of system momentum can be conserved. Okay, because while at the same time the individual particles are losing momentum or gaining momentum or whatever, or are accelerated because of internal forces, but it's happening in such a way that the center of mass does not get accelerated. So let's look at another example to understand that with a bit more calculation type of thing involved. Okay, so now in our next example, what we have done is here we are considering a system consisting of two blocks kept on a smooth horizontal surface, and the blocks are connected by a ideal spring. So it's a massless spring of certain constant, and the spring obeys Hooke's law, wherein the restorative force because of the spring is equal to k into x in magnitude. That thing you know from earlier. So this is a system of two blocks, mass m1 and m2, connected by spring of spring constant k. Now what we have done is initially we've kept this system at rest, but with the spring compressed by applying some external force like this. We're applying equal and opposite external forces like this, so that the system is at rest. So it's not zero. Applying some forces like this, as a result of which U and A is zero for both of these blocks initially. And the spring is in a compressed state. Let's say X naught is the compression of the spring. So initially, the system is held at rest with the spring compressed. Okay. By application of the two forces. Okay, these are constant horizontal forces of magnitude f each, as you can see in the diagram. Now, given that these forces are equal to 20 newtons in magnitude, the spring constant is 10 newton per centimeter. The mass of the block is 10 kg. And the initial compression, the initial compression will not be given. Okay. So first thing we'll do is find X naught, okay, the initial compression in the spring. Next, what we'll do is we'll find the accelerations of the blocks A1 and A2 just after the forces are simultaneously withdrawn. So you withdraw the forces or remove them at time t equal to 0. Show that the acceleration of the center of mass will be 0. And from that, we come to the third part, that find the speed of the blocks at the instant when the spring is back to its natural length. That is, it is back to the relaxed state. So initially, you are keeping the spring compressed by applying some external forces like this, and that's giving the spring a compression of X naught. So we will find how much that X naught is, and now suddenly at t equal to 0, we assume that we withdraw the two forces. So as a result of that, the tension in the spring acting outwards on the two blocks starts making both of them accelerate horizontally. And as a result of that, by the time the spring comes back to natural length position, the two blocks have got some linear velocity. But obviously you cannot use kinematics here because the acceleration will be variable as the blocks are moving. Why the acceleration will be variable? Because the net force acting on the blocks, which is the spring force, that itself depends on the state of the spring. No? It is kx. It's not constant. But just be careful of the units of the various quantities. Okay, K is given to us in Newton per centimeter, not Newton per meter. Okay, so let's understand how this question works out. Yes, that's your answer is correct now. But the magnitude of the acceleration will be different now because the masses are, oh, I've taken masses of both as 10 kgs. Just we'll make a quick correction here. M1 I meant is 10 kgs. And the second block is lighter. So let's take M2 as 5 kg. If you take both M1 equal to M2 equal to 10 kg, then your answer is correct. Okay. But okay. Now take the masses to be different. Okay, so let's work out. So what we'll understand is that initially what the free body diagram will look like of each block. Okay. This is at rest before you release the force. Okay. So that's happening because there is an outward tension in the spring, and that tension is equal to kx naught, okay, where x naught is the initial compression. So whether you look at this FBD or you look at this FBD, you can understand that F is balanced by that tension. So F is equal to kx naught. So x naught is equal to F by k, and that means that it is according to the values given. Yes, correct. Yeah, so what was the magnitude of the force? It was 20 newtons and the spring constant was 10 newtons per centimeter. So correct. The 10 centimeters answer which you have sent is correct. Okay. Yes. Any doubt? Tell me.
Yes, sir. Sir, actually, I thought like since the masses are equal and the forces acting on them is also equal, so I thought that each force will balance kx naught by 2, like half
No,
distance.
no, no, बेटा. See, what is the spring का क्या property होता है? That spring को अगर x naught का compression दिया, तो the tension in the spring is kx naught. It is not kx naught by 2. You understanding? No?
Yes, sir.
So on each side, the spring is pushing each block with how much force? With a force equal to that tension equal to kx naught. No?
Okay, sir.
Understood the point? Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, so this is the first part. Okay. Now, when we release the force, immediately at that moment, what is happening? जैसे मैंने force release कर दिया है, on both these blocks, that external force is no longer there. Okay. But at that moment, the tension is still equal to kx naught. Just after releasing the forces. Okay, because they are still at rest, but they will now start to move because of the acceleration provided by these forces. So they will have acceleration like this. So kx naught will be equal to m1a1 and kx naught will be equal to m2a2. So E1 you can see will be the spring force which is 20 newtons divided by the mass of this block which I've taken as 10 kg, so 2 meters per second square, and E2 will be 20 divided by 5 or 4 meters per second. So these will be the individual accelerations and the directions are as shown. But what about the acceleration of the center of mass? It is m1a1 plus m2a2 divided by m1 plus m2. Now, how much you expect this acceleration of the center of mass to be? Expect that it should be 0, no? Because the net external force on the system is 0, no?
Yes, sir. Only internal force of the spring.
We are withdrawing the external force and only the spring force is acting. So the net external force weight and normal reaction balance. So net external force is 0. So the acceleration of the center of mass should be 0. And that is justified from here also. If you see these values, you will see that m1 into minus 2 I cap plus m2 into 4 I cap will be 0 because masses are in that 1:2 ratio.
So the masses will just keep oscillating, right? Once we remove the.
Here the system will oscillate back and forth. Okay. So when the oscillation starts, now both the blocks start from rest. So they will start with instantaneous accelerations of 2 and 4, but the center of mass will remain at rest.
Yes, sir.
So as they are oscillating back and forth throughout that oscillation, right from the initial state to when the spring is going to some extension, then coming back to compression, then again going to extension. And every time they're in between compression and extension, the spring is at natural length. So you have a lot of kinetic energy because potential energy is converted to kinetic energy. But every time that happens, also you will see, but throughout that motion, the center of mass does not move. So with respect to a fixed center of mass, the blocks keep oscillating right and left, right and left like that. Got it now?
Yes, sir.
So now the third part, what we have to do, we have to find the speed of each of the blocks at the instant when what is happening, at the instant when x is equal to 0. Spring is back to natural length. So we want to find V1 and V2 when x is equal to 0. That is the spring is at natural length again. Now one more thing you'll see, what is the initial velocity of the center of mass? That's also 0.
Yes, sir.
And acceleration of the center of mass is 0 because momentum is conserved. So what will happen here is that the momentum of the system will remain constant. The momentum of the system will remain 0 and that will be conserved. That is why even after some time, when the blocks have individual velocities v1 and v2, the velocities will be in such a way that the momentum of the system will be 0. So at some general time, if this mass is having a velocity v1 like this, and this mass is having a velocity v2 like this, but still at that moment, what will happen? The center of mass will be stationary. VCM will be 0. So we can see that m1 v1 with a minus sign plus m2 v2 with a plus sign must be 0. So v1 is to v2 will always be in the m2 is to m1 ratio. So in this case, it will be 1:2 ratio. At any instant, this will hold. Okay. But the other thing is, at some instant, if the spring has changed to this state from x0 to x, and what will also happen? So this is coming from conservation of linear momentum. Okay, this is conservation of linear momentum of the system. But there is also conservation of energy, no? Is that correct? Conservation of energy is taking place for the system
Yes, sir.
because there is no friction. So change in kinetic energy plus change in spring's potential energy, delta U of the spring, that should be 0. Okay. So going from our initial state where the kinetic energy was 0 to some time when the speeds have become v1 and v2, in general, what is the change in kinetic energy? It is half m1 v1 square plus half m2 v2 square. But what is the change in potential energy? It is half k x square minus x naught square. This should be 0. This is the general equation. Okay. But now when x is equal to 0, this relation will become what? It will become that half m1 v1 square plus half m2 v2 square minus half kx naught square because x has become 0 is equal to 0. So this is our second equation. This is our first equation. Now we will solve these to find v1 and v2. Understood now, people?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So put the values. So let's see what all values we have to substitute. M1 was 10 kilograms, right? M2 was 5 kilograms. The spring constant was 10 newtons per centimeter, and the initial compression we had given the spring was 2 centimeters. So using these values, now we want to find v1 and v2 when x is 0. when the spring is back to natural length. ये अपने को निकालना है. So what concepts we'll use? We'll use conservation of energy, which is giving me this equation, and we'll use conservation of momentum for the system, which will give me this equation. So solving these two equations, the two unknown quantities V1 and V2 will get, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so just make a note of these people and work out the values of V1 and V2. I'll verify it for you. Okay. Okay, so let's solve this, people.
Sir, just a second.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not removing it. So see, I'll just substitute the values. Na? So in this second equation, क्या आ जाएगा? I'm cancelling on the half on both the sides. है ना? So 10 v1 square because m1 was 10 plus 5 v2 square will become kx square. Now k को मैं कैसे substitute करूँगा? 10 into 10 raised per 2 because I want k in newtons per meter. So it will become 1000 newtons per meter. And similarly, x naught I will substitute in centimeters, sorry, in meters. So it will become 0.02. Okay, so kx naught square. Okay, so I'll get the relation that 10 v1 square plus 5 v2 square is becoming 2 into 10 raised power minus 1. So 4 into 10 raised power minus 1. 2 squared. So 0.4 joules is the sum of these two. But actually, this is not the kinetic energy. This is the double of kinetic energy because I have cancelled the half. You know? This is m1 v1 square plus m2 v2 square is equal to kx naught square. So I'm actually calculating double of the kinetic energy is equal to kx naught square, which is 0.4 joules. Okay. So now I will substitute from equation 1 in this. From equation 1, v1 by v2 is 1 by 2. So v2 is equal to twice of v1. So point. So how much will this give us now? 5 plus, sorry, 10 plus 20. Okay. So v1 square is equal to 0.4 by 30. Okay. So v1 will become square root of 4 by 300. Yes. And that is in meters per second. So you can always convert that to centimeters per second later. So v1 is square root of 4 by 300 or 2 by 10 root 3 in meters per second. And v2 is double of this, so it's becoming 2 by 5 root 3 in meters per second. So these are the speed of the blocks at the instant when the spring comes back to natural length. But like we were discussing that this system is not going to remain that way. It will oscillate. So from here it will go to extension, and as the spring extends again, the speed of the blocks will slow down. At some stage, both the blocks will come to rest. Then again it starts to compress like that. It will go on and on forever. But we are not concerned with that right now in this particular question. What we are concerned with is that what is the speed of the blocks at the instant when the spring has come back to natural length, that is x is equal to 0. And at that particular instant, we can see that the speed of the blocks is given by this v1 and v2. That's a pretty straightforward thing, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this is like a slightly more typical example of application of conservation of momentum. Because in this question, actually, apart from conservation of momentum, we have used a second conservation principle, and that is what? Conservation of energy. So you'll see that a lot of questions at JE level will have combination of these two concepts. Conservation of momentum भी use करना है अपने को और conservation of energy भी use करना है, दोनों चीजें एक साथ. Got it now?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Done, sir.
Okay, so this question is clear now, people.
So what if the masses are taken equal?
If the masses were taken equal, then V1 V2 का ratio same आ जाता. Suppose I had taken the cases where M1 is equal to M2 is equal to 10 kg. So when we have minus M1 V1 plus M2 V2 is equal to 0, you would have got from this that V1 is equal to V2. And then when we write the energy equation, we would have got half M V1 square plus V2 square plus half kx square minus x naught square would be 0. So for x equal to 0, we would have got mv square minus half kx square x naught square is equal to 0. So you would have got like 10v square minus half into that same thing which we written here.
So
1000 into this would be 0. So यहाँ से common velocity का value लेता है. So v1 is equal to v2 is equal to some v because m1 is equal to m2 equal to some m which is 10 kg. So in that case, this would have been the answer. Okay?
sir,
Yes.
sir, if the two blocks were to be placed on surfaces having different friction coefficients, then this won't be the case, no?
Yeah, actually, even if they are placed on the surface having same coefficient of friction, we will not be able to conserve momentum, because they are of different masses. So different amount of friction is acting on each one.
Yes, sir.
So
So
the
then,
center of mass will not remain constant, will not remain, at rest, because there is some net frictional force then acting.
so then the motion would be like oscillation plus translational motion on the surface, no?
Yeah, I mean the center of mass would translate, and with respect to the center of mass, the particles would be doing something called damped oscillation. Have you heard the term damped oscillation?
Yes, sir.
Sir,
Whenever there is some dissipative force like friction or air resistance or something, which causes the amplitude of oscillation to gradually decrease. So in real life, all oscillations are damped oscillations. No? There is no such thing as a perfect oscillation,
yes, sir.
right? So that would have happened in that case.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So yeah, we will come to those kind of situations also. Like for example, when we come to the chapter of oscillations, simple harmonic motion and oscillations, we will also towards the end look at damped oscillations, and we look at systems where center of mass might be moving while oscillation is happening with respect to center of mass, or center of mass might be at rest while oscillation is happening, like this case. So we'll solve a lot of other things about the oscillation also. Like here, we have not really solved the oscillation because we haven't found the time period, we haven't found the amplitude, all these things. We have just used the concept of center of mass, momentum conservation, energy conservation to find one very specific thing. मैंने initially उसको 2 centimeters का compression देके छोड़ा. So when it comes to natural length, तो blocks के individual speeds क्या है? This is the only thing we solved here, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now
Yes.
next let's look at an example where we are doing calculation of position of center of mass again, but using a slightly different concept. Okay, so center of mass of rigid bodies, okay, and the use of something called superposition. So let me explain this, what it was. So if we have what is called isotropic rigid bodies or isotropic bodies, isotropic means having uniform mass distribution. So basically uniform density. Okay. So, and such a body is suppose of some geometrical shape, simple geometrical shape which is known like a cylinder or a sphere or something. Then the center of mass is always at the centroid. So for any isotropic, this term isotropic, I'll explain in detail. Okay. Isotropic rigid body of a a symmetrical shape. Okay. The center of mass will be at the centroid. So by isotropic we mean uniform mass distribution. So for example, for a three-dimensional body, it should have a uniform density. Okay. For a surface, which is an example of a 2D body, two-dimensional body, it should have uniform mass per unit area, like that, etc. So here it will be at the centroid. So for example, if we have a solid cylinder of uniform density, where will the center of mass be? The center of mass will be at the centroid, which will be the midpoint of its symmetry axis. ये cylinder का symmetry axis है. Okay. So if the length of the cylinder is L, then the centroid will be inside at a position which is cutting the symmetry axis into L by 2 and L by 2. Okay. Similarly, if we have, for example, so this is an example of a three-dimensional rigid body. Cylinder, solid cylinder is a three-dimensional rigid body and it's uniform in density, so it's isotropic. Now, next example, let's say we have another solid body, but in this case, it's a cube of uniform density, solid cube of uniform density. So where will the center of mass of this one be? It will be at the centroid, and how we define the centroid? It is the point of intersection of the three diagonals, which is also the point of intersection of the bisectors of the sides and all that. So center of mass will be at centroid C, which is the intersection of the three, what is called body diagonals. Okay, which is at that symmetry point. So these are examples of this. Okay, now let's take an example of a two-dimensional case. Okay, so now this time, let's say I have a thin disk. So this is not a sphere. In the three-dimensional diagram, it would appear like this. It's what a uniform but thin kind of thickness. It's not very thick. It's like this. And it's uniformly thick and having uniform mass per unit area on the surface. So it's a thin uniform disk. So this thickness is negligible compared to the radius. The radius is R and this thickness is T. Then T is very small compared to R, the thickness. Okay. Now it's uniform means it has a uniform surface mass density or mass per unit area is uniform. So where will be the center of mass? It will again be at the centroid of the disk. Whereas if the mass distribution is not uniform, like the disk is what we call anisotropic, so the density of mass at the surface is not same everywhere, then we cannot say that the center of mass is at the centroid. It can be at any other position because the mass is not uniformly distributed. But if we know that it's an isotropic body and it's some symmetrical shape, like it's a sphere or it's a disk or it's a cube or something which is symmetrically known in geometry, then we can always say that the center of mass will be at the centroid. Yeah, this point is clear, people?
So then how do we find it?
How do we calculate?
For an anisotropic.
For anisotropic or non-symmetrical shapes, then we have to use integration. That summation formula that we've seen for discrete particle system. So
Yes,
in that, what happens? The particles individually are differential masses dm instead of mi, right? And the summation sign is replaced with integration. So we will come to that also. That's in fact a big part of this chapter of center of mass. But first, let's understand how to make use of this thing. That if we have symmetrical bodies which are isotropic, then their center of mass is at the centroid, and how we make use of that. Let's understand that next. Okay.
Okay, sir.
So for discrete, we use summation, but for like continuous, we have to integrate for continuous mass.
When we convert from discrete to continuous mass distribution, we have to convert that summation sign to the integration, and then make use of definite integration with limits.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Sir, done.
Okay, people. Good. So let's look at an example of how we use superposition along with this principle. So superposition is basically what we mean by the term superposition. It's just means overlap. Whenever two events are overlapped, we say that there is superposition. So the principle of superposition basically just means superposition just means overlap. Overlap or addition of two events which are occurring, or two quantities which are present, or whatever. That is the general term of superposition. Now we'll see how we make use of superposition in center of mass concept. Okay.
So,
So yes,
so this term we mainly use for waves, na? Superposition.
superposition is used for waves also, like when two waves from two different sources, like two sounds coming from two different speakers are overlapped at a position. So we say the net sound that we are hearing, or the net intensity of sound, is the superposition of the two. It can be applied for electromagnetic waves, like light is overlapping from two different sources. It can be applied for, energy. Okay, from two different sources, if there's two different work done, then there's a net superposition. It can be from superposition of charge in the case of electrostatics. There can be superposition of electric currents, because two different batteries are supplying two different amounts of current. So the net current in a wire is the superposition of the two. All these things. So in any situation, we can apply the term superposition. Superposition is a general term. Okay, you understanding now?
Yes, sir.
Now we'll apply superposition in center of mass concept. Let's see. Okay, so let's see that kind of situation, how we can apply it in a center of mass situation. So for example, मेरे पास एक दो bodies का combination है sir. I have two bodies which are like in the shape of a square plate, like this. Okay. So this is a thin uniform square plate. Of dimension L by L, where L is, let's say, 10 centimeters. And alongside, beside it, what I've done is I've kept another rectangular plate. That plate is kept like this. So it is kept like they have a common edge. Okay. So along with that, I've kept this other rectangular plate. And this is L1 and this width is B. Okay. Again, this is also uniform. Okay. Now L1 is, let us say, 20 centimeters, whereas B is only 4 centimeters. Okay. Now both the plates have same thickness. Okay, but the density of the square plate D1 is 2 times D2, where D2 is the density of the rectangular plate. Okay. So we have to find the position of the center of mass of the system. So find the position of center of mass of this system consisting of both the plates. Plates 1 and 2. Let's say this is plate 1. Okay, now I'll tell you the general idea how we are going to use full superposition here. What we'll do is now the square plate, it has, let's say, some mass m1. Okay. So where is its center of mass located? At this point C1. Okay. And the rectangular plate, it has some mass, let's say m2. So where is its center of mass located? At C2. So now what we can say is we can replace this system with a single particle of mass m1 located wherever that position C1 was, and another single particle of mass m2 located wherever this C2 was. And now we can say that the system center of mass is where? Is at some position like this, for which we can use the formula that position of the center of mass is summation mr divided by summation m. Or we can just use coordinates, that x coordinate of the center of mass is summation mx divided by summation m, and y coordinate of the center of mass is equal to summation my divided by summation m. So what you do is, like, for example, you can define this corner as your origin. So with respect to this corner, you can find the position of the center of mass of the first one. C1 का कुछ x1, y1 होगा. You can find the position of the center of mass of the second one, x2, y2. So now you have a two particle system with respect to the system that you have defined, where origin was this corner, you know C1 and C2. So you know where the center of mass of the system is. Okay. Only thing is masses. Now masses का क्या ratio होगा देखो. It is not just about the densities. It is also about the surface area. ना? Mass is basically equal to what? It is density into volume. Okay. Or d, small d, whatever, density. Now, then, for example, for the square plate, it will be density d1 into L square into some thickness. So let's say that thickness is capital D. Now both are of same thickness, remember. Whereas M2 for the rectangular plate will be different density into different area L1B, but into the same density. So from this relation, you will get M1, M2's ratio. Okay. So just because densities are 1:2 doesn't mean that the masses will be in the ratio 1:2. No? Understanding the point?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. So just try this out now. So you will locate the center of mass of each of these bodies. Okay. And then you will replace the entire body with an equivalent particle of that mass, M1 and M2, at that equivalent center of mass point. So then you have reduced the system to a two particle system. No? Instead of two rigid bodies, you have two particles. And for two particles, you know a very simple formula to find the center of mass. So this is the principle of superposition, that we are superposing two events. That one body center of mass is here, one body center of mass is there, and M1 and M2 are so much and so on. So then where is the system center of mass? So we are using the superposition principle.
Okay, sir.
हाँ, but पहले acceleration कितना है बेटा? 5, because velocity कितना दिया था मैंने? 10 meters per second, right? At 2 seconds. है ना? So v is equal to u plus 80 में directly मेरे पास क्या आ गया? That 10 is equal to 2a. है ना? तो acceleration कितना आ गया? 5 meters per second. तो net force कितना हो गया फिर? 500. Okay, people. So let's look at this. Okay. So this I'm getting as D1 into, this was 10, no? So 100 centimeter square into some thickness. And this I'm getting as D2 into 80 centimeter square into some thickness. Okay. So M1 by M2's ratio, I'll get D1 by D2 into 5 by 4, correct? And it is given to me that D1 is twice D2. So this will actually become 5 by 2. So M1 is to M2 is equal to 5 is to 2. So I can take M1 as 5 times some small mass and M2 is therefore 2 times small. So I can do this. Okay. Now let's see, with respect to this corner point, where is the center of mass of the first one located with respect to this origin? This C1 will be at L by 2 comma L by 2. So that will be 5 comma 5 in centimeters. Okay. Whereas second वाले का center of mass कहाँ पे होगा? It will be at, okay, this thing. No? So this will be the center of mass. So see, this distance will be L1 by 2. Okay. So that is how much now? That is 10 centimeters. And this distance will be B by 2. So that is how much now? 2 centimeters. So the x coordinate for C2 will be actually L plus capital L1 by 2. And the y coordinate will be B by 2. Okay. So C2 will be at 10 plus 10, 20, comma 2 in centimeters. Okay. So just check this correct, people?
So actually for that square, I found the length of the diagonal that was 10 root 2. And then I thought that it should be 5 root 2 as diagonals bisect each other. So it should be at the.
But it is 5 root 2 from the origin, no? So, and that is at angle 45. So, अगर coordinates निकालूंगा तो वैसे आएगा ना 5 root 2 into 1 by root 2.
Oh.
But
yes.
the distance OC1 is correct, no? You got that only, no? But
हाँ,
मुझे coordinates चाहिए because it's more convenient for me that way, ना? Because मैं ये formula use करूँगा ना center of mass के लिए.
Yes, sir. Got it.
What you've done is correct. This is of magnitude 5 root 2. So you can express it as a vector. For example, position vector of the first particle will become 5 root 2 into cos 45 I cap plus sin 45 j cap.
Yes, sir.
So its x coordinate is how much? 5 only, na? And its y coordinate is also 5. Similarly for this one, you can,
Okay, sir.
But as you can see, using coordinates is a little bit easier, na, than using vectors for this type of question.
Yes, sir. It's less. It's very lengthy that.
It is going to be less difficult. Okay. So now I have placed a particle of M1 at this position C1, and I have placed a particle of M2 at this position C2, so I can easily find the position of center of mass. M will cancel out, when I do that weighted mean thing. So I'll get the answer actually in centimeters, the position of center of mass.
Yes, sir.
But it will come with respect to that corner point. I have used that corner point as my origin and my axis like this.
Yes, sir.
Now, I've got particle M1, which is 5m, located at position C1, which is 5, 5 in centimeters. And I've got particle M2, which is 2m, which is at position C2, which is at 20, 2. Okay. So this is my situation now. I've got some M1 at C1 here and some M2 at C2 here. So the system center of mass is somewhere here. So this center of mass is at some xcm, ycm, for which I have to just use this formula. It is m1 x1 plus m2 x2 divided by m1 plus m2. So it becomes 5m into 5, okay, plus 2m into 20 divided by 7m. So कितना हो गया 25 plus 40, 45 by 7 centimeters.
It should be 65, no? 25 plus.
Oh, sorry, 40 plus 25, 65, yeah. 65 by 7. So that's almost 7 centimeters, 7 point something. So almost 9.2 centimeters. Like this is the
Yes.
x coordinate. Okay. And similarly, y same, we can find out. So from this, we will get this. Okay. So take down this question. Okay. And finish it. Now we will see another question, which is like a little more tricky version of this. Okay. So I'll make the diagram for that question and first explain the question to you. So in this question, what we have is we had a disk of radius r, a thin uniform disk of radius r and a certain mass. But now what we have done is from the disk, we have cut out a round hole. And that round hole's own size is equal to the, I mean, its radius, its diameter is equal to the radius of the larger disk. That round hole. So this is where the mass is present now. I cut a round hole such that we look at the two symmetrical diameters of the disk. They're like this. So this is where the center of this smaller disk is. I mean, the hole is. Okay. And this is of r by 2 radius, whereas the original disk was of radius r. So a thin uniform disk has, so this is of radius r, has a hole of radius r by 2, and the center of the hole is at, as you can see, r by 2 comma 0. This one has the center at the origin. So this one has the center at this, okay, in the xy plane. So has a hole like this. So find the position of the center of mass. So you can complete that second part of this YCM question later. It's quite easy. But now concentrate on this example. We'll finish this and then wind up today's class. Okay.
Okay, sir.
So try out this question. Think first of all what method you can use over here. Where will the center of mass be? Can you give me an idea? Matlab, should it be in first quadrant, second quadrant? कैसा होना चाहिए?
Sir, on the negative x-axis.
Yes, it should be somewhere on the negative x-axis. Between x equal to 0 and x equal to minus r. The edge of the disk कहीं बीच में होना चाहिए.
Yes.
But it should not have a y coordinate because there is symmetry with respect to y-axis.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so now how you will find the position of the center of mass? Think of that. The hint I'll give you is that if you place a small disk of radius r by 2 and same density back over there, then the system center of mass will come where? It will come to O.
Origin. Yes.
Yes.
So use superposition. That if you superimpose this body, which has some unknown center of mass, let's say at x equal to some minus x1, if you superimpose this body with a smaller disk whose center is at C and radius is r by 2, then that two body system center of mass will come to where? It will come to the origin.
Oh, okay, sir.
So it's like a twisted application of superposition, like a reverse application. Okay? So try this up. I'll put up the solution. Try to formulate the solution yourself.
Yes, sir.
Sir, I've sent you my answer. Can you check it?
Yes, sir. Me too. Hello, sir.
Yeah, anybody got the answer?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
sir.
I've sent it to
कितना आ
you.
रहा है? Oh,
Sir,
you-
minus r by 3 comma 0.
minus r by 3 है कि r by 6 है?
Sir, I got R by 4.
अच्छा, masses का रेशियो बताओ क्या है? अगर जो ये वाला बॉडी है ना मेरे पास,
Oh, yes, sir. It should be M by
बट उसका मास कितना होगा? देखो, अगर टोटल डिस्क का मास m होता है ऑफ रेडियस r, तो डिस्क ऑफ रेडियस r by 2 इसका मास क्या होगा?
Pi r square by 4 into d.
है ना?
अच्छा,
1/4 होगा ना, बिकॉज एरिया 1/4 है.
हाँ.
Yes, sir.
मतलब मास इज प्रोपोर्शनल टू एरिया ना, इन दिस केस ऑफ द डिस्क. ठीक है. सो अभी जो ये बच रहा है ना अपने पास, द डिस्क विद द राउंड होल, इसका मास कितना हो जाएगा? 3/4 m होगा,
Yes, sir.
है ना? सो m1 is to m2 कितना है? 1:3 है.
Yes, sir.
ठीक है. तो m1 को अगर मैं m लेता हूँ तो m2 को मैं 3 small m लिख सकता हूँ ऐसा ना. या आई कैन जस्ट राइट इट एज m by 4 and 3 m by 4. दैट्स आल्सो फाइन ना. ओके.
हाँ. Yes,
Now
sir.
see this body m1 that I've got, the disk with the hole, sorry, m2 that I got, its center of, sorry, this is the y-axis is going through this point. So इसका center of mass कहाँ पे है? कोई unknown position पे है suppose. So this one center of mass is here. So C1 is at some x1, which is a negative quantity obviously, comma 0. Okay. And the other body which are there, which I'll add to this. So now if I place this disk over here, so I have placed m1 at this position C1. Sorry, I'll have to make this C2. तो इसका जो पोजीशन है वो अननोन है, कुछ x2 है, बट इसका जो पोजीशन है c1, उसका x कोऑर्डिनेट कितना है, r/2 है, करेक्ट ना?
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
अब ये कॉम्बिनेशन का सेंटर ऑफ मास कहाँ पे होना चाहिए, ओरिजिन पे होना चाहिए.
0, 0, 0.
m1 x1 plus m2 x2 should be equal to 0.
Yes, sir.
So the combination center of mass should be at the origin. So xcm for m1 plus m2, that is the full disk, that should be at the origin. So m1 x1 plus m2 x2 should be 0. So m1 is capital M/4 into r/2, whereas this is 3m/4, but its position is unknown. तो आ गया ना x2 minus r/6.
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay. So maybe you made some calculation mistake, just check that out. Did you people take the ratio of mass correctly, or you took it 1:2 instead of 1:3?
Oh no, in one step I had taken the denominators as 8 and 4, and the next step I by mistake took both of them as 8. So that's where the mistake came from.
Anyway, now you understood this, no?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so just make a note of this. Okay, people. So with this, we complete the today's lecture of center of mass. Okay. Now, hope you started doing questions from HC Verma and all. I'll be sending you one more exercise also, worksheet. So you do that along with a certain number of questions from HC Verma. I'll send you. You will have to do up to question 28 or so from HC Verma system of particles. Along with that worksheet, I will send, which will have some 10-12 questions. Okay. So
Okay, sir.
this till the next week. We have a lecture tomorrow also. So tomorrow we'll do continuation of this. Okay. So I don't expect too much homework by tomorrow, but by next week you complete all these things which I'm saying. You know? So also, any doubts pending for you in circular motion, people?
Sir, not from circular motion, but I've sent it to you on WhatsApp.
From which chapter, beta?
So one is from heat and thermodynamics,
Okay, okay,
and the others are some conceptual type.
okay. ठीक है. Just send me a reminder message. Now maybe it has got lost in other messages. I'll cover that today. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
So can you just discuss that heat wala question now?
Beta, I've got another lecture coming up. Okay. So I'll just send you a message related to that. Huh?
Okay, sir.
And we do have doubts on related to circular motion.
So that some of those doubts we can discuss in tomorrow's lecture. Circular motion के लिए ना मैं कुछ time रखूंगा. I'll keep aside half an hour, 40 minutes in tomorrow morning's lecture so that you can complete those. Huh?
Sure, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Bye, sir. Thank you.
Okay, bye.